Welcome to Independently Speaking, the podcast from the Independent Schools Association. ISA represents head teachers leading independent schools across the UK, each one unique. From small community schools to specialist institutions focused on performing arts, outdoor education, faith, sport, or special educational needs. ISA members reflect the remarkable diversity of independent education. Join us as we hear from school leaders navigating the challenges and opportunities shaping their schools and the wider sector. And now, here is your host, ISA Director of Education and Inclusion, Helen Stanton-Tonner.
Welcome to the ISA podcast, Independently Speaking. I am your host, Helen Stanton-Tonner, Director of Education and Inclusion for ISA. In today's episode, recorded on the second day of the ISA conference in May 2026, we're exploring the idea of authenticity, what it really means to show up as ourselves in leadership, in classrooms and in school communities, and why that matters now more than ever. I'm delighted to be joined by Faith Hagerty, founder of The Acting Head. Faith brings together a deeply unusual and powerful combination of experience as a trained actor, former head teacher, business founder, and leadership coach, all rooted in a commitment to supporting schools' most precious resource, their people. Faith's soon to present a conference session here at ISA, Harnessing Authenticity, drawing on her background in drama, school leadership and coaching to help leaders and staff build confidence, clarity and presence in their professional roles. Today, we'll explore how authenticity supports well-being, belonging and effective leadership, and how creativity can help schools thrive in challenging times. Faith, welcome to the podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, Faith, you've had quite a fascinating career journey, sort of from professional acting to teaching to headship and now consultancy and coaching. Could you start by telling our listeners how those experiences came together to really shape the work that you do through The Acting Head?
I think I've always loved working with people. And then from that, I saw that facilitating growth in others was a strength. But even, back in the day of working in waitressing or bar work, it was all about working with people. And then my love for drama, again, it's that sort of the assessment of character and working with an audience, and then gradually sort of developing a comfort in your own skin that you get through drama. And as a drama teacher, that's what really, really mattered to me, was watching these young people. It's not about the skills that they develop in drama for their own sake. It's about what it brings to their lives overall. And I think that was a huge discovery for me when I realised that's what drama really did. So when I moved away from headship, I saw an opportunity really to bring my drama training together with my leadership experience to support people. So the work I'm doing is very creative and it's evolving because, once you develop a relationship with a school and you've delivered some sort of program, they ask you, could you do this? And as I'm a creative, I always say yes. And it's really exciting and no 2 days are the same. But of course, that's what's great about headship too.
And at the conference today, you're doing a talk entitled Harnessing Authenticity. Now, authenticity is a word that's used a lot in leadership, and we've heard it quite a few times at the conference already. What does it actually mean to you in a school context?
I think it's holding on to who you are, and that's tough at times when you're faced with difficult decisions, when you're under that immense pressure from all sides as a head, from governors and staff and parents, and of course the biggest pressure of all, getting it right for your young people. And I think it's not always easy to hold on to who you really are and those, that sense of integrity and doing the right thing and following why you're there in the first place. Because pressures become financial or they become, commercial. And when you've come into your career with young people at the heart of it, you're suddenly a CEO without having been trained. Most heads haven't been trained to be a CEO, and there they are. And I think one of the things that will safeguard you in that role is being true to yourself. And I think the more you play a role, which is ironic coming from me, but the more you play a role as a head, I think it makes you more vulnerable, actually. So I would say, it's about holding on to that authenticity.
And obviously, drama and performance sit at the heart of your work. And some school leaders might feel wary of those words. How do drama and practices help people feel more genuine and grounded rather than that performative aspect?
I think it's about being comfortable in your own skin. And one of the things that, when you're training to be an actor, which, I've done, I actually spent quite a lot of time trying not to act. The more you try to act, the more imposed it can be, and the more, this idea of acting in inverted commas isn't necessarily what you're looking for. But years later, having been through the drama training process and then finding myself in a position where I can get up in front of an audience and I feel comfortable doing so, that's more what it's about when it comes to the work I'm doing with school leaders. It's about your self-validation, standing in front of an audience, believing that you're worthwhile being on that stage. And despite their experience and their expertise, quite a lot of heads don't necessarily feel that in front of an audience. Something changes when they stand up in front of a crowd, or particularly when they have a camera put in front of them. So I think, yes, it's less about acting. It's drawing on the skills of drama and performance to find comfort in your own skin.
And that links a little bit to what you were saying about authenticity sort of previously as well, doesn't it? And you speak very powerfully about staff well-being and self-image, which also kind of links into this, doesn't it? And from your experience as a head, where do you see leaders and teachers really struggling most with confidence and identity sort of at that moment?
Imposter syndrome. And I work a lot with school leaders now with those feelings, and actually I'll talk about it today in my session. In every position, I'm sure in lots of different industries, it's not just about education, but I think particularly in schools and rising to a role that you haven't gone into education trained to do, imposter syndrome's real, and it's different for everybody. And I think that probably when we think about how our own work as heads with other teachers, with our staff, with our leaders, we're always trying to encourage them away from imposter syndrome. We're coaching all the time as a head. So I think that's probably the crux of it, actually. And when times are tough in schools, as they are, we know at the moment, how do you, when you're faced with very, very difficult decisions, do you feel empowered? Do you feel qualified to make those decisions? And the imposter syndrome, if you haven't got someone helping you with that, can just grow and become quite crippling.
Obviously, you've had a lot of experience with headship itself, and since leaving headship, you've worked with schools and associations sort of in a different way. What patterns are you noticing across the sector when it comes to that pressure, belonging, and emotional life of schools?
It's such a difficult. What I'm watching at the moment, the sort of snapshot of it, is that not only are heads desperately, focusing on their own school and the sustainability of their schools in the years to come, but they're also very closely watching what's happening in schools around. And I think it's something it's changing the relationship between schools a little bit too, because we're seeing closures, aren't we, of small schools, sadly, that aren't making it with the recent changes to VAT and all of those things. And it was already quite a competitive market, the independent schools market. And what we don't want is it to become a sort of Hunger Games environment where it's a sort of survival of the fittest. We want schools to work together. We're all working towards the same thing. And I think that's a pressure on heads that's tough, and that's incredibly hard to manage. So, you just got to hope that the governing boards that did make they were much more forward-thinking and progressive about looking at all of this when we knew it was coming. Those schools are likely to be in a better position. But I think, yes, it's the head that can be so isolated in that scenario. So I've been supporting leaders all over the country with this kind of stuff.
And that isolation is real, isn't it? For some heads can feel incredibly lonely and like they don't have a network to sort of reach out to. And that's kind of where sort of that individual support that you've been given, the sort of coaching becomes quite vital. And you qualified as a grade and coach sort of and now offer that coaching and 360 appraisal for school leaders. How does coaching, in your view, support leaders to reconnect with who they are, not just what they're doing?
There is a natural crossover, isn't there, between the personal life and the professional life? I'm sure in any career, but certainly in schools. Choosing to teach is such a deeply personal, values-based decision, I think. And the grading system is a values-based system of coaching. So it takes you back to who you really are. It's not a sort of solutions-focused, perhaps in the more, the business model maybe of coaching, which can be slightly different to that. The focus is all about getting underneath who you really are, what drives you, where your core purpose is. And that naturally crosses over to the person. And interestingly, some of the leaders that I'm coaching, they almost feel a little bit guilty that we're not talking about the school enough, or we're not talking about the job enough. But they are the job, they are the role. So it's giving them the space and accompanying them along the way with they've got it already. They've got the decisions in there already. They've got the steps, but and that's what's beautiful about it. You're not telling anybody what to do. You're not advising, mentoring, any of that. It's sort of walking alongside them and accompanying them on the journey and helping them to open some doors. But so it's a really powerful, I find it probably the most valuable work that I do.
Sort of following on from that, many leaders feel they're almost holding it together at times. There are so many pressures. We've mentioned some of them already, particularly when schools are struggling financially. How can schools create those cultures where authenticity is encouraged without losing professionalism or the boundaries that are needed?
Yeah. I mean, what's professional is kind of subjective, isn't it? Because some behaviours that a head might exhibit would seem open and maybe showing a bit of vulnerability to some of their stakeholders, but then you might have others who interpret things in a slightly different way. But can I give you an example, actually? So, I worked with a head who went through a hysterectomy, and she wrote very openly to parents to tell them that, and talked really openly about what is actually quite a taboo subject that a lot of people probably wouldn't talk about. They wouldn't talk about in the playground. They wouldn't, the parents got talking. So she set a tone there for the whole community. And she started some conversations on women's health that possibly wouldn't have been there otherwise. Young people understanding this kind of, those particular kind of health complications. And I remember watching that and thinking, wow, that was brave. It was unapologetic. And there was a trust that formed between that head and the rest of the community, because she laid herself bare and just said, this is what I'm going through and I want to talk about it. So you should talk about it. And we did.
And it's in being open in that way, it in a sense, as you said, it opens doors for other conversations, doesn't it? And allows other people to follow the pattern of that vulnerability, feeling secure in doing so.
Yeah.
But that's quite a big step to do, isn't it? And it's quite a scary step for some heads who feel that they have to keep those professional boundaries and keep that, in a sense, that status line in place. But what you're suggesting is actually it's a bit more of a grey area.
Yeah, and I think, what is it that's, if anyone did think that was crossing a boundary, what boundary is it crossing? And if anything, actually, it was educating everybody, and that's what she's there to do. So, yes, I think it's a great example of authentic leadership, actually. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And one of the areas which we've noticed, particularly in the maintained sector, is that creativity often gets squeezed when schools are under pressure. It's one of those areas, people tend to hold tight to the academics and push away other areas of curriculum when time and finances are struggling. Why do you think creative approaches are not a luxury, but they're actually a necessity for leadership and well-being?
Yeah, I get a real bee in my bonnet about this one. So traditionally, we would talk about creativity in relation to art, music and drama, and pigeonhole it as if that's where the creativity sits, as opposed to, as we now understand, and thank goodness we do, that creativity is really like the highest form of intelligence, isn't it? So, I would call, we talk about facilitating subjects for university, don't we? And we talk about history and we talk about geography and we talk about core subjects like those English, etc. Why don't we talk about drama as a facilitating subject? That is the subject that builds self-confidence, like I talked about earlier, build a sense of comfort in your own skin, interpersonal skills, creativity, the kind of sophisticated links that they had to make in A-level drama, like it was just unbelievable, that kind of conceptual thinking that was encouraged in that subject. So that goes way out of the field of drama. It goes into every industry. So yes, that's something I do feel quite passionately about, actually.
And we have some wonderful examples across ISA schools, actually, that do facilitate drama and music in all subjects, including the cores. And one of the schools that we had the pleasure of visiting recently actually teaches most of the subjects through a drama phase. So it's absolutely a positive step and one that works really well. Now, for heads and senior leaders who might be listening, who might want to live and lead a more authentically way, but aren't sure about where to begin, what's one small step that they could take today?
I would say if they don't have any coaching support, that would be the step to take. If you feel that you're reaching towards something and you want to make a step, whatever that is, and you might feel stuck, coaching as a process can unlock that and can be so transformative. So I would recommend that really as a step.
And sort of finally, as we bring our conversation to a close, as you're preparing to speak at our conference today, thank you so much, what are you most hoping our delegates will reflect on or perhaps do differently after your session?
If it was something tangible, it would probably be the public-facing bit, and moving away from being script-dependent. And I think, in terms of the human in front of an audience, the more we feel able to improvise a little bit and go off script and really show who we are, even if it's not perfect, that would be my recommendation. And the same thing when you're on camera. There is a bit of a dependence on script. It becomes a bit of a crutch, and it takes some of the character away, or it can do. So that would probably be one step.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you so much. This has been a thoughtful and energizing conversation. You've reminded us that authenticity isn't about having all the answers or performing confidence. It's about self-awareness, connection, and creating space for others to be the best selves too. Your work sits so naturally at the intersection of leadership, creativity, and well-being, and I know our listeners will be taking a great deal from what we've just talked about today. Thank you for joining us, and thank you too to our listeners for tuning in to the ISA podcast, Independently Speaking. If you've enjoyed this session, please do subscribe and share it with colleagues, and join us next time as we continue exploring how independent schools can lead with humanity, confidence, and purpose. Until then, stay curious, stay connected.
You've been listening to Independently Speaking, the podcast of the Independent Schools Association. For more information about ISA and the schools we support, please visit isaschools.org.uk.